so many people could join us. And I find it interesting to note just how many people were engaged to this title. I will make my way to the spirit come hell or high water. It's quite a title to actually present and also to speak to, because in those words actually arise out of the mystery schools. And the mystery schooling of the past is something that informs us of a lot of knowledge about what it is to kind of work on this transformative path of inner development. It also allows us to know something about what we meet on the way. And this meeting of hell and high water is useful to get a sense of, because for many people, when they're working with meditation, when they're working with inner development, in fact, today, I would say, even when they're just working in the world, they're often confronting experiences which they wonder, is this right? Have I gone down the right path? Should I be experiencing this? Often we think when we're working on certain development exercises that it would lead us to a particular sort of inner peacefulness or a sense of being at ease with the world. And yet we're often confronted by experiences that reflect something quite different than that. And many times I'm reflecting to individuals that ask certain questions, that's actually quite normal. It's quite normal when one's beginning to meditate to actually get more thoughts and not less in the head. Even though we have this idea that everything will become quiet and still, it can be revving up till you feel like there's 6 radio stations all going off at once and wondering, have I gone completely the wrong direction? So these experiences that we have and we have to encounter and sometimes have to endure are described in the mysteries as a way of helping us to prepare ourselves to meet them and also to continue to forge our way forward. I will make my way to the spirit, come hell or high water. Now, these 2 pictures of hell and high water are described in various schools, but they give us this kind of archetype of the 2 paths that are often trodden. On one hand, when we enter into the microcosmic pictures, which means our internal life, we are confronted by ourselves. We are confronted by parts of our being that we didn't actually even know were quite like that. And at the same time, when we enter into these macrocosmic pictures, we also have an encounter with a self. But that experience is very different. It's more an experience of dissolving of the personage I know myself to be, dissolving of everything that I have labeled myself, and I find myself with this other experience. You could call both of these experiences the one where I have to encounter all of these difficult traits of my being, these past parts of myself that show themselves in these really uncomfortable confrontation, or this part of myself which is actually beyond all those labels of my personal life so far. Man, woman, sister, daughter, partner, all of those labels just dissolve away. And there is this other experience of self. Very different experiences. One really a pathway where we take hold of everything that lives in us. Another where we actually let go of everything we think we are. one takes us into this dissolving of self, and the other takes us into this confrontation with ourselves. And everyone that goes through this journey of self-development has to go through this process in one direction or the other. And Steiner says, ideally, we go through this simultaneously. This part of the inner development path is very difficult to navigate because it is not easy, and it is also confusing if we don't have a language for it, if we don't actually understand what's taking place. So much of the mysteries were ways of preparing ourselves for what will take place, but actually readying our inner life so that we might stand the ground of that which is to come. So in the past, the mystery schools were generally something that was hidden, or if it wasn't hidden, it was an exclusive connection to a chosen group of people. There were certain necessities to come to those points. And even though the mystery schools have gone through various renewals, and we see the varying mysteries renew themselves through the ages, many of them we know nothing about. There are different rites of passage and initiations and traditions that in some countries, there would have been multiple different pathways. But all of them led to this, either this microcosmic or macrocosmic experience of this first necessity to meet ourselves in a new way. Now, we're prepared for these meetings because if we are not prepared, it's very difficult for us to manage this dissolving of self. In fact, for those of you that have worked in meditation for a while, know that moment where your consciousness shifts and you immediately come back into presence because you're just about to lose yourself on that threshold. You've put your toe into this conscious experience of annihilation, of dissolving. And the deeper soul fears that. It contracts because it's hard to go into that death process where I, as I've known myself to be, no longer exist. And then we also have that experience in meditation where you realize there's these parts of yourself that become more amplified, this critical nature, the judgmental self, the vain self, the pride in yourself, all of these forces that seem to be exaggerated or at least revealed. And that can bring, for the human being, a great shame. And this shame and this fear that meets us on this very deep level isn't necessarily fully conscious to us. And this is something that is hard to explain in the process of our own development. We can maybe understand it through the experiences of life where you go about your everyday encountering certain facts and engaging with certain people and certain events. But then in your dream life, in the night life, you process those days with totally different images. Various things that you didn't even catch in your consciousness become amplified. Instead of just seeing that person, you see all of your associations with that person, or your liking or disliking becomes a part of this picturing consciousness when you go into your dreams. And you wouldn't have necessarily known in the waking consciousness just how much you were getting affected or what was pulling on you. Because in life, we have this external relationship to the world, but we have this deeper internal relationship to the world. And many of us don't follow that consciously. It's either in a subconscious or even a completely unconscious place in our being. And so if someone was to say, oh, you're afraid, you'd say, I don't feel that fear on dissolving myself. But then when someone begins to meditate, they become more aware of it. And they realize, I'm afraid of letting myself go on that threshold. And that is a sign of progress, to be aware of the fear of dissolving. Of course, one has to overcome that fear. But the awareness of it is actually a useful step. Just as the awareness of the kind of all the thoughts that are coming in is a useful step. Just as the awareness of all the things that live in me that I rather not want to see is a useful necessity of the path. And that's what becomes so complicated in our times, and particularly with certain expressions of inner development, where somehow we feel that as we develop ourselves, we're just going to feel lighter and freer, and we're going to love everyone, and we're going to love ourselves more, and everything's going to skip through life, and we're just going to be cruising because we're on the path. And that's really hard when actually that's not the reality, and it never has been the reality. That's why the first stage is talked about as purification, preparation, purification, preparation, and more preparation. And in the old mystery schools, that preparation was given in many ways. Sometimes the teachers would bring themselves into these forms that would really bring this horror to the students' consciousness, that can they stand the ground of it? Will you pull back at the sight of these things? Will you be able to identify the fear and the shame that rises in your soul? And then what will you do with those things? It's so interesting to ask ourselves that question. What will we do with the things that we encounter on the path? How will we meet it? And we don't want to look at this in a psychological point of view, because God is not a psychologist. We're not looking at it from that point of view. We're not trying to understand our soul life from psychoanalytical point of view. But seeing how we meet these experiences can help us understand why the world itself right now is going through such difficulty. Now, that's something that it's a really important thought for us to try to engage with. The idea that in the past, this movement into these other realms of consciousness was done through preparation and purification consciously for a chosen group of people that could carry the truths and realities of spiritual life. There was certain schooling that took place, and that schooling has been renewed and shifted through the ages, and we can still read about it, and some of it is incredibly relevant because it tells us of something of the journey of the evolving soul. The language may have changed, and certainly the way that we can take some of those pictures and have them affect us in a way that make sense to the experience we're having today may have changed. But there's such wisdom behind the mysteries. But today we are coming face to face with a new reality. And this new reality has been spoken about for a long period of time. And a long period of time, I say about 100 years, where we look at really closely at what these new mysteries are about. We're not talking about just a renewal of the mysteries, which we have seen and we can see for all the various cultures and traditions and the great cosmologies with their different ways of entering into this relationship to the spiritual world. We're not looking at the renewal, but entirely new mysteries. Entirely is probably not the right word, but new mysteries for what is taking place for humanity today. And what is taking place is producing a lot of discord, because there's often not a language or an understanding for the effects in the collective consciousness of humanity now that we are all actually crossing that threshold. That threshold used to be crossed by a chosen few. It used to be a prepared place where the human being already was able to stand the ground of the first trials of crossing the threshold, which in one way you could call is a deep identity crisis. Now, not used in a traditional way of today, but really an identity crisis, because of who I thought myself to be. I am not that. Who I've been conditioned to be, I can no longer live that. And when we consider that first experience, that first necessity taking place for not a few, but for humanity to varying degrees and to various levels of consciousness, we can understand why times are really difficult. Touching into this dissolving of self and everything I've known myself to be causes in the depths of the soul some deep fear. And people deal with that differently. Some people who are afraid come out fighting, and others are just in a state of anxiety. And there's nothing quite like touching your toe into the dissolving of self to make you an atheist. It's one of the great tools of atheism, because I can't manage that. I can't manage that, so I grasp myself back. That's a strange thought, that the crossing of the threshold by humanity will produce a wave of atheism that we've never seen before. Surely that doesn't make sense if we recognize the threshold leading us towards the spiritual world. And yet when we understand what these experiences do to the depths of our soul, we can understand why so many processes are becoming so significant for certain people. I will fight for my atheism because I'm fighting for my own security. I will fight for my identity because I can't find myself in these experiences that are not coming to most people consciously. At best, we would say it's a subconscious process, but often it's unconscious. And then the flare-ups that occur through our social constructs, because not a few, but many are shifting their relationship to the spiritual threshold. It gives a lot of positivity as well to humanity, because we can find ourselves waking up to a individual spirituality that we find a certainty within our own being. And we can feel those voices stepping forward, standing out. And at the same time, we know that this path is no longer like the old mysteries where we can rely on someone else's experience, where we can look for a guru to tell us what to do or how to navigate it. Because we're all there. And how that resonates within the human soul is going to be very varied. And what will come up as issues for varying communities, it will feel like some countries themselves are having an identity crisis, or certain communities are having an identity crisis. When I'm not who I thought I would be. Now, there are many things that we meet on this threshold. It's not just an encounter with aspects of self that I've never met before so clearly. The self that is this eternal being that has got nothing to do with what presents itself in front of me today, nothing that I thought I was, or the self that is full of the greatest harshness of my being that I didn't think was me. Regardless of which self we might encounter, and we may encounter both unconsciously, subconsciously, fully consciously, we are met with an identity shift. But on top of that, at this threshold, some will be experiencing resounding shells from past experiences or past incarnations. Resounding shells, that's a strange thing to say. I know Dostoevsky called this realm of the astral world shell hell. Shell hell. Because so much of what we see is not actually real, but a semblance of reality. Pictures, like our dreams, are not real, but are placed, our inner life is placed outside of us. Now, all of that is fine if you're prepared, and if you've gone through certain processes. You can even have a language for it. You can differentiate between that which is actually something of my past coming towards me, or that which is a shell of some other consciousness I'm meeting on the astral plane. But to not have a language and to not have a consciousness around that can put the depths of human souls into much confusion. Am I who I'm supposed to be in this life? Am I supposed to be in this body? Where am I in relationship to self, relationship to others? And it's really something to ask. Are we actually, do we have what we need to make it through this threshold? Because we have to continue, as it says, to make our way to the spirit, come hell or high water. And yet we can feel this desire not to go through this and find the realities of spiritual life, but rather to orientate ourselves in this realm, which is happening for very many people, where the astral world, this world of semblance and not reality, is becoming more and more just like the physical world. And we're going to see that produced in the world around us in technology. We see it with the metaverse. We're going to see it with more and more relatedness that doesn't actually occur in sense perceptible experience. But that's just a reflection of the struggle we're having on this threshold. And I shouldn't say just a reflection, because it's huge what's taking place as we try to navigate this change in relationship between being in the body-bound experience of self and the shift that's taking place in the inner world of humanity as we move across this threshold where many things get reversed. So feelings of fear and anxiety are likely to increase. Many people don't even know why they're anxious. They don't even know why the atmosphere feels anxious and fearful. And we respond to that in various ways. But also feelings of shame or error, feeling like I'm never going to be right in myself, will also increase. That the way I am isn't right. The way the world isn't right. The way it's all unfolding just isn't right. And that increases and increases, not because that's actually the fact. It's because our soul is going through really deep shifts. And yet many of us are just not prepared, or we don't have a language for it, or we assumed that it would be full of grace, instead of having to work through some of these things that we'd rather not like to confront. And yet, in the mystery schools, we know this to be a part of the path. We know that the very substance of all of those errors that we experience becomes in its transformation, the virtues that carry us forward. And yet we're not educated with that. Our world kind of educates us for very different things than where we are. And so how do we prepare ourselves? How do we make it through to the spirit? How do we prepare the generations that are coming? And how do we care for those teenagers that are so vulnerable? So vulnerable to this astral world, which they cannot navigate because they don't have the faculty to navigate it. So we're standing at a time which, as Steiner said, that inner development will be a necessity. It is a necessity for us to navigate the deeper soul experiences that are taking place. And of course, we can see the kind of resultant struggles that are arising out of that, as well as this gleams of hope and possibility, because we're changing and shifting. We're not looking towards a belief system of religiosity that will carry us and while we go about our everyday existence, but rather a really living, dynamic reality of our connection to the spiritual world. And so much is growing out of this possible time. But it is the time of the threshold, which means it is the time of recognizing the hell and the high water and the consequences of what that means in the depths of the soul, and how that might play out around us or in community, particularly when we don't have a language for it or even a recognition of what's taking place. It's in the mystery schools, they would often prepare for these encounters by bringing them in front of us. We can see this through the arts. In fact, the arts can be an extraordinary way of helping us to uplift the soul to meet what it has to meet. Of course, not all art falls into that category, but many times it's feeding the deeper needs of our inner world, even when we don't necessarily know it. But we do get a sense of what nourishes us. We do get a sense of what is helping us to find our way through some of these challenging times that we're facing now, but it appears will probably get stronger. And a certain strength of soul is required to do that. So we strengthen ourselves, not by avoiding hell and high water, but trying to make our way through it. So I want to give you a little experience of this soul encounter through asking Seamus to work with the Parsifal legends and to bring into being Kundri. Kundri is a picture of something that the soul has to encounter. In a way, you could say it's an expression on this astral plane that we all meet in one form or another. And it's interesting for us to, through the arts, to observe actually what do we meet when we let ourselves be impressed upon? What comes up in us? Does it bring a certain tension? Does it bring a certain fear? Does it bring a certain agitation? What takes place in the soul when it has to encounter these difficult and yet strengthening images? And we go to, are you ready for this, Seamus?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. All right, you can just, I think, go into the experience. Some of you will know what part of the story this is, and others it might be new, or you might sort of have a guess, but it doesn't matter so much about all the details. I think as Lisa's just presented it, we can just kind of go into this encounter. 'Twas a joyous festivity held at the meeting of Arthur and Parsifal in the camp of the Round Table host on the border of Terre de Salvage, the vast wilds surrounding the Grail. There, in a grand celebration, the company reveled and danced as they welcomed him into their midst, mighty Parsifal, famed for his strength and courageousness with feats of arms. Such a famous and glorious company, all gathered together at once in one place, has not ever been seen. Noble Parsifal pledged his bold oath to the fellowship of the Sun Hero, and they joined in the mirth of the feast amid laughter and raucous delight, which rang clear to the heavens above, giving thanks for the birth of the light, for the time of the year was at hand when the light is awoken anew. But through their midst, a maiden rode abruptly. So sudden was this entrance, it escaped not the observation of a single soul. Her mount stood high, as would a stallion, but at a closer glance, one plainly saw a mule whose nostrils had been sliced. The beast was marked with many searing irons. This hellish creature bore its burden on. And she herself did not look like a lady or any average person of the world. A pair of tusks thrust jutting from her jaws. Her nose looked like the snout of a hound. Upon her head, her ears resembled that of a bear's, and her fingers, talon-like, resembled lion's claws. Her name was Kundri, and she was known to be a sorceress. She rode to where the king sat in high state to address his presence. Arthur Pendragon, what you have done here has brought you and many Britons to shame. The pick of every land would now be seated in high honor had not some canker spoilt the vintage of their fame. For perfidy has joined their ranks and weakens their esteem. King Arthur, you once stood high above your peers for glory, but your fame on its ascent has toppled down. Your prestige, which used to go by leaps and bounds, now hobbles at the rear. The mighty reputation of the Round Table is destroyed by the presence at it of Lord Parsifal. Wheeling round, she then turned to Parsifal. Cursed be your outward beauty and your strength. You may think me monstrous, but I am far less monstrous than you. Now, explain to me, Lord Parsifal, how it came to pass when the sorrowful angler was sitting there before you, joyless and despondent, that you failed to free him from his sighs. He made the load of grief he bore apparent to your eyes. Oh, heartless guest, you ought to have had more compassion on his suffering. Did not your host present you with a sword that you in your unworthiness received? I swear on your head that no one of your looks was ever so perfidious. You feather hook, you viper's fang, you are a man devoid of honor and reft of any decency, Lord Parsifal.
So when we have to encounter these double forces, these shadow natures in us, in the astral realm. And we do so consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously. This resounds in the human soul. And this isn't happening for just a few. This is actually what takes place on the threshold that humanity itself is moving through. And as we bear these experiences and we try to work our way forward, many challenges will come towards us because it's not easy. For a lot of people, that shame just makes them blame everyone. That shame comes out as blame. I can't tolerate that shadow. It's got to be outside of me. I can't tolerate those forces. They have to be in you. There's someone there that's responsible for that. Or it can go inward where we feel like, oh, I'll never have anything to bring. It resounds differently in each of us. But its purposefulness in the mysteries is so that we can actually put it to one side and move onwards, so we know what's ours and that we don't project ourselves on the surrounding environment. But we know what's ours to transform. I want to now ask Megan if she would bring this other picture. This is a picture not of the encounter in the microcosm of our own self that all have to experience in the astral world at some point or another. And we all are as a collective in some form or another. But now we're going to listen to a movement into the dissolving or the annihilation of self. And this is from St. John of the Cross. So it has a particular path that it comes through. And it is brought by someone that has already been prepared. And so the experience of this in this St. John's expression is of someone that's prepared for the dissolving. But it's called Dark Night of the Soul.
On a dark night, kindled in love with yearnings, oh, the sheer grace. I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest. In darkness and secure by the secret ladder, disguised, oh, the sheer grace. In darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. In the happy night, in secret, when none saw me, nor I beheld aught, without light or guide, save that which burned in my heart. This light guided me more surely than the light of noonday, to the place where he, well I knew who, was awaiting me, a place where none appeared. O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed in the beloved. Upon my flowery breast, kept holy for himself alone, there he stayed sleeping, and I caressed him, and the fanning of the cedars made a breeze. The breeze blew from the turret as I parted his locks. With his gentle hand he wounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained lost in oblivion. My face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies.
When we let these pictures move us and we allow ourselves to meet these preparatory experiences, it does help us to get ready for what each of us has to encounter. And at the same time, this task to make our way to the spirit can be the task that we can do in order to work with the reality of how many are struggling in the hell and high waters. So the new mysteries are not mysteries for the chosen few. They are preparations in a way that are set in momentum for humanity, because this was always coming, this crossing of the threshold. And part of those new mysteries can be deeply understood when we recognize the value of inner development. Yes, we have to meet these, in a way, two aspects of self that can really change our relationship to who we think we are and who we can be in the world. But we can also awaken to this experience of realizing that there is this other wiser being in us that we can awaken through connecting to this deep and difficult journey to what is truly this true guide in each of us. Not an outer guru, not a teacher that can tell us what to do or can take anything away from us or can change it for us, but that inner guidance that can help each of us navigate our way through this threshold. And that guidance really is the first sort of preparatory process that's going on towards the new mysteries, at the same time as us having to confront the reality that the old mysteries always presented to us. The dissolving of self and the confrontation of self, the microcosmic and macrocosmic possibilities. And yet the new mysteries say, you can have your guide. This isn't for a chosen few. Every human being has the possibility of awakening that. which means that each one of us has something to navigate us through these difficult times. The second aspect to the mysteries is to understand what we might call the new karma, because that's another aspect of meeting. We have to encounter what we have been and all that we have done in a way that is transformed through the new mysteries. Because not only do we each have the capacity to awaken to our own guide, which is the necessity of the new mysteries, very different from the old, where you had to have someone else awaken you to those realms, help you cross. You had to pay the ferryman. It doesn't matter which way you express it, it was always somebody took you through that process. And now we have that possibility in ourselves. And this was what makes it new. It's not a renewal of what was. It's not a shift in the way that the Hierophant or the Guru or the Master or however you want to place it works with us in the new terms for the age. It's actually a new, that this is available to us, and a necessity, because it's not just a few that are going through the threshold. And so it is with this understanding of what is the new karma. How do we find the healing pictures that transform the past without it being a matter of eye for eye, tooth for tooth? You did this to me, I do this to you. The old mysteries of balance, of creating accountability, of so-called justice, is renewed through the new mysteries. And along with that, we have the support of what can only be described as a new creative capacity for love. Now, these are just words, and they can seem so far away sometimes from the realities that we're having to endure. But we're beginning to glimpse, actually, that each one of us can unfold something that allows us to create into the future something new. Now, I want to just give a few exercises out of the inner development path that will allow, hopefully, a little glimpse into how these things can support us, because they're helping to develop the faculties that will awaken these new mystery tools that already exist in us. Tools is not the right word, but there I said it. These new mystery capacities that already exist in us, but we do need to awaken them. So the first one, I would like to just give a few exercises. Many of you would have done them before, but it's useful to get a sense of how supportive inner development exercises can be, and also how they help us to build a relationship to the supportive forces, not just for ourselves, but how we could see how that might work to help those that are really struggling in the hell and high water. It doesn't necessarily appear that someone's struggling when they scream for their atheism or when they blame every single person around them. It doesn't appear that they're necessarily struggling. But we have to understand that's a soul in struggle. And I'm not, suggesting that this is a matter of a missionary attempt to navigate anyone else through this. But what is evident through the collective consciousness is that the more we can make our way to the spirit, the more clearly the path is trodden, and the more possible it is for others to see that path. Otherwise, what is being offered? What is being offered to young people today that want to understand other realms of consciousness? What is being offered when they're struggling and they're told they can't get out of their anxiety or their depression unless they, for instance, take a substance that removes them from themselves? What else is being offered in Western esotericism that says, actually, there is so much that could give you a language and an insight for what you're experiencing? We're not going so far off track. This is part of the track. But how do you stay with it and not get lost in all the other forms that are taking place? That there is this mission taking place to create a astral world that looks just like the physical world. To make the spiritual world appear like it's nothing other than a dimension of our own consciousness. And it can be played with machinery or with chemicals. So I'll give you a few exercises. I know for some people this is a long session, but I think it's useful and you can always come back to them in the recording. And those people that are really interested in understanding how the new mysteries are presented through the light of Western esotericism, then this will be deepened in the Christmas 4 sessions of preparing for Christmas. But here are some to help us reflect and understand the different offerings that arise out of inner development. Now, in the Western esoteric path, it does begin with this idea that you can think for yourself. That's actually quite important in our world today. And I think if we were to say, how do we prepare our teenagers for what they're going to meet? That would be the key thing. How do you prepare someone to be able to, as a teenager, really think for themselves? That's really quite a big ask when it comes to the teenage years, but if we could set up that, it would be a beginning, because if you can't think for yourself, if thinking is not in your hands, then you have nothing to hold up or to transform, because the path of development requires that you have something to transform it. And this may sound difficult for some people that have gone to traditions where we want to get escape from thinking. We don't want to think. We want to just sort of let everything go, let it all go. To think that actually everything in us can be utilized as a part of transformation. So being able to think for oneself, meaning one can actually will within one's own thought structure, is actually a starting point. Because then you can hold a thought. But many of us are aware that we think thoughts that are really sense-based thoughts. They're based on the constructs of our earthly life. And so with esoteric development, we start with a thought that in a way cannot find its answer through the sensory world, that cannot find its reflection based on materialism. But the thought is held in a way in order to hold up what we would typically call our brain-based materialistic thinking. Because if we're going to learn to think in a living way, where our thoughts are influenced by spiritual activity and not just by our sense-perceptible bodily processes, then we have to hold up those processes. But it's incredibly important that they are there in the first place. It is a path of thinking, because thinking must occur out of yourself first, and then you can hold up that thought, because the power that comes from holding up the thought allows then for living thinking to begin. And what's significant about living thinking is that you begin to have thoughts that are much wiser than you can think out of the construct of your everyday self. You have insight or revelation, or it can be called all sorts of things, but the reality is you sense that something much wiser thinks in me, thinks with me. And this is the beginning of that relationship with your guide. And to establish that's possible in you out of your own resources is such a sturdy point of reference in hell and high water. To establish this capacity to experience this living thought, the wiser thinking. So I'll give you a traditional picture about how that's worked with esoterically, and that is to take a thought. This archetypal one is wisdom lives in the light. And I know I've brought this several times, but often what happens when I'm working with these pictures is that I just keep bringing them until I feel they've landed somewhere where they are now accessible. And so this picture won't stop coming until it doesn't have to keep being spoken every time. So this wisdom lives in the light. And that's something that, before I go on, just to clarify what I just said there, spoken is really only part of it. Having it heard is really the other part of it. And this is something that we do between us in support of this struggle that we have in humanity, because in this chaotic astral world, there are a necessity for light-filled spiritual pictures to be living. And so when they're spoken and they're heard, they are inscribed. Wisdom lives in the light. Here is the statement. It's an esoteric statement. And I'll just put us through the steps of this, because it's quite useful to know that when we're working with pure thought content, like this exercise is, which is purely in thought, then we enter into the chamber of thinking. Usually it's through this point in our heads. Now, this is not using the body, but to get a sense of what that means, I just want you to try this exercise just briefly, where you look out close your eyes and you look out into the forward space ahead of you, and then look back into the inner space. And then you look forward into the outer space. And again, you look back into the inner space. Now, there's a quality that happens in your consciousness when you're looking inwardly. Now, soften the eyes. Don't have the eyes, the physical eyes, do anything. Don't focus on the body at all, but maintain the activity, the quality of inward looking. And it's in that quality there of inward looking that we contemplate the thought. Wisdom lives in the light. Now, the effort that it takes to do that and the qualities that we experience in that begin to forge an opening to what becomes a living thought process. And over time that builds where you can have thoughts and this wiser thought thinks with you. But it requires a preparation. And that grows. And I won't go through all those processes because there's just the timing. But I want to now present a very different inner development exercise that doesn't just occur in pure thought, but now connects with our feeling content. And these exercises are usually pictures that come from a spiritual lawfulness that actually counter some of the conditioning of our own inner world. And I'm just going to read this. This is from A Path to Self-Knowledge, Rudolf Steiner, this contemplation. And the contemplation goes like this. And you'll hear, the moment you hear it, you'll hear the difference between a pure thought contemplation and one that presents a different picture than perhaps we might have been educated with. In many ways, it is of no consequence for the progress of human life, whether it is oneself that is able to do something, or whether it is others that are able to. When we let certain contemplations resound in our soul, it helps to correct some of the errors that we carry. We're often conditioned in the Western world that competition and being the one and be ambition, everything that's connected to progress is really connected to self. We might have had it in our education, already being compared as a child with another sibling, or in our schooling, in the way that schooling run out. We see competition everywhere. We don't get educated to this thought. But when we meet the inner schooling, we have to re-educate some of those conditions. And we do so through actually health-giving pictures. Pictures that are not countering, but presenting something that is liberating, freeing. So it's useful to compare the difference of the contemplations, the thought one, purely in thought, what that leads to, and then the thought feeling pictures that present to the inner world new ways of seeing, new ways of healing, actually healing pictures. That if they were really taken up in our soul, would actually adjust the way that we work with our colleagues, for instance. If we truly took that up, we would have just as much joy when someone else did something than whether we were able to achieve it. It would be that it is done and not who's the one that gets seen, who's the one that gets the medal, who's the one that gets the reward. And I'll just give you the third contemplation. And this one is interesting because if you compare the three, and I bring them together because they're useful to compare side by side, to understand how inner development training prepares us and how it works in us in very different ways. We have these pure thoughts that work to develop this living thinking, this wiser connection in us. We have healing pictures that help us to build a different relationship to what we might think of as this old karmic way to a new healing progress forward. And it's resulting in this third impulse, which interestingly has to come out of our own experience, our own biography. And I'll just read it. Recall a moment when you had a resolution to perform a deed of love. Now enkindle that moment within you to an intensified experience of love, warmth, and sincerity. Yeah, I feel like I could speak for a week on these exercises. So much is understood in one simple exercise. So much can be unfolded. But to understand this, you take something like this exercise where I recall a moment where you had the resolution to perform a deed of love, and then you re-enkindle it with all of those forces again in your being, how you're uniting yourself with that impulse, with that, where did that love impulse come from? I had the resolution, but where was that arising out of my being? And engaging that comes out of our individual will. Now that can be difficult for some people because they say, I'm not sure if I've actually ever had a resolution to perform a deed of love. But that is an outcome of the inner development path. Living thinking, where the wiser being thinks in us, healing pictures, where we adjust ourselves from these pictures that are inscribed by a world in a way that's often unhealthy in what it presents to us about what it means to be human, what it means to live in community. So we bring these healing pictures into our own inner world. And that results in us being able to experience these moments when we have these resolutions to perform a deed of love. And it's these deeds of love that actually will create the future for humanity. not necessarily our own future personally. We have to be clear about some of the nuances, and that's really what makes it a deed of love. So we're facing extraordinarily challenging times, and yet we must say to ourselves, I will make my way to the Spirit, come hell or high water. And in each of us making our way, we are working towards what's possible, what is there calling us. And when we can even begin to sense into what wants to become, we start to really feel the quality of that Christmas light beginning to beckon. Now, I know a lot of our friends have no relationship to Christianity, and certainly it's not part of their upbringing, but the connection to the new mysteries through the lens of esoteric Christianity can be incredibly illuminating. So I know that many of you will be joining in for this Christmas preparation. And we also know that when we gather together to really think spiritual thoughts together, we are trying to bring something into this collective atmosphere that can serve as a beacon to those that are really struggling. There's a little picture of what's happening, although of course so much is possible to speak about these things, and yet I think at this point of where we are, it's sometimes useful to just sort of see what we're up against and then say, okay, let's keep making our way. And on that note, can I ask Seamus, would you bring a verse for us? Thank you.
There is a love that hovers over us like wings of angels poised upon a breath, awaiting recognition from our eyes. And when we see within each other's gaze the stars alight and feel the warming band as we meet in a sunlit ring of grace, like home, forgotten but returned anew within a moment's dreamlike wakening. Then, masters of winged servants weave aloft, and round our wavering hearts begin to form a vessel fortified with strength and courage, transcending earthly means, to catch of wisdom's light one hallowed drop from far beyond the reaches, which may fall to the cup we hold between. And nothing of this world or of the next can breach its solid rim or shake its base. This sturdy vessel, linked betwixt the lives of all who see their part and hold their peace within the chain of spirit, bridging worlds, strong enough to stand through any siege, light enough to illume the darkest night, and warm enough to thaw the coldest heart. And through this causeway built between our souls, as though from heaven itself, pours alchemy, a fiery liquid gold into the world, which burns away impurities and lifts our eyes up to the heights, as though the sun itself had given each of us one of its rays to carry through the world.
May all this strength and courage go with you